We're going to go to the upper Mississippi River now, where rising water.
We are covering some severe weather hitting the Midwest.
Bakersfield, California, January 14th. That sits in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, home to nearly 400,000 souls, most of them sleeping when it began. Not sleeping after. Sarah Chen was awake. Night shift nurse, pulling into her driveway after 12 hours at Mercy Hospital. She'd remember the exact moment because she was looking at her phone. 4:23 a.m. A text from her daughter, 3 states away. "Love you, Mom. Drive safe." She'd smiled at that. The kind of mundane moment that becomes sacred in retrospect. The last normal thing before normal ended. At first I thought it was a truck passing, she'd tell reporters later, though her voice on the recordings carries something that sounds less like recollection and more like confession. You know that feeling when a big rig passes too close? That vibration in your chest? But no truck passed. The vibration grew. Not stronger, deeper. It was like, she paused in the interview, searching for words that don't exist in casual vocabulary. Like the earth had a heartbeat, and it was getting louder, not faster, just louder. Across Bakersfield, the same realization spreading like a wave. This isn't an earthquake. Earthquakes shake, violent, lateral, the sharp terror of ground that betrays its promise of stability. This was vertical. A pulse. Up, down, up, down, up. Rhythmic? Said Marcus Webb, retired geologist, 37 years studying California's temperamental crust. I've felt hundreds of seismic events. Hundreds. This was... The recording cuts off there. When it resumes, his voice has changed. Smaller, somehow. This was something responding. Responding to what? The pulse lasted 4 minutes. Precisely 4 minutes, according to every seismograph within 200 miles. Not the chaotic duration of tectonic release. 4 minutes. Exact. As if timed. As if times measured. When it stopped, the silence felt wrong. Too complete. Like the world was holding its breath. And then, the phones started ringing. Overlapping phone rings, creating cacophony. 911 dispatch centers across Kern County lit up. Hundreds of calls in the first 10 minutes, thousands by dawn. But here's what made the dispatchers' hands shake as they typed their reports. No one was calling about injuries. No collapsed buildings. No ruptured gas lines. No medical emergencies. People were calling about their times yards. "My driveway is gone," one caller said. Background noise suggests a woman in her 60s, voice steady but confused. Not broken, not cracked. Just not there anymore. There's grass where my driveway was, and my driveway is where my lawn was. Like they switched places. Another call, logged at 4:31 a.m., the tree in my backyard. The oak tree that's been there since before we bought this house 20 years ago. It's 15 feet further from my fence than it was yesterday. I measured 15 feet. But the tree isn't damaged. It's just elsewhere. Another, my neighbor's pool is in my yard now. Their whole pool. Concrete, water, everything. Intact. Not a crack. But it's not in their yard anymore. It's in mine. How does a pool, how does something that weighs thousands of pounds just... The caller couldn't finish. How does it? Indeed. Music swells slightly. By 6 a.m., as winter dawn broke pale and uncertain over Bakersfield, the scope became visible. News helicopters, because of course, news helicopters responded faster than explanation, captured footage that would loop on every channel for days. The subdivision of Rolling Hills, southeastern Bakersfield. 347 homes. From above, the streets looked rearranged. Not destroyed, rearranged. Cul-de-sacs that curved west, now curved east. Blocks that ran parallel now intersected at angles that made mapping software crash. Property lines that had been surveyed and certified and legally documented since 1987, now meant nothing. It's like someone picked up the neighborhood, shook it like a puzzle box, and set it back down, said one aerial observer, his voice crackling through the chopper's radio. But nothing's broken. That's what I can't. Everything's intact. Just time's wrong. The geologists arrived by noon. USGS, Caltech, private firms, government agencies whose acronyms most people had never heard. They brought equipment, ground-penetrating radar, seismographs, soil sample drills, satellite imagery, comparison software. They set up, they measured, they tested. And then, one by one, they stopped talking to the press. The official statement, released at 4 p.m. that same day, 12 hours after the pulse was brief, seismic event measuring 4.2 magnitude occurred at 4:23 a.m. local time. No injuries reported. Minor property displacement observed. Investigation ongoing. Minor property displacement. That was the phrase they chose. For a phenomenon that had relocated an estimated 14,000 tons of earth, concrete, and infrastructure, without breaking any of it. Minor. But the unofficial conversations, the ones recorded by news crews with good microphones, the ones caught on cell phone video by residents who approached the perimeter, those told a different story. I don't have a framework for this, one scientist was heard saying to a colleague, not realizing he was being filmed. Soil doesn't behave this way. Earth doesn't. Reorganize times itself. Not without massive energy release. Not without destruction. This is impossible, his colleague offered. I was going to say directed. Sharp intake of breath. Directed. As if the earth hadn't moved randomly. As if something beneath or within had times chosen, times what to move, and where. The social media response was immediate. Hashtags trending within hours. Because some noticed what the news networks, in their scramble for geological explanations, had missed. Or chosen not to mention. The date. January 14th. Exactly 7 years to the day after, a similar, though smaller, less dramatic ground displacement event in the same valley, same region, same time of morning. That event had been dismissed as a minor subsidence issue. Underground aquifer collapse. Unfortunate, but explainable. 7 years. Biblical number. The number of completion, of cycles, of divine timing woven through text after text after text. 7 times I will pass over you, the old prophecies warned. But that was just coincidence. Wasn't it? Sarah Chen, the nurse who'd pulled into her driveway at the exact moment it began, gave one more interview before she stopped talking to media entirely. The reporter asked her what she thought caused it. She looked directly at the camera. Her eyes, nurse's eyes, trained to see what others miss, held something that made the footage uncomfortable to watch. I think, she said slowly, we've been standing on something patient, something that's been waiting, and, I think. She stopped, shook her head. What? The reporter pressed. What do you think? I think it's starting to wake up. The interview ended there. That was January 14th. The first shaking. The first of 3. And what happened 14 days later, exactly 14 days later, in a place 700 miles north, where the geology is completely different, where no fault line connects to Bakersfield, where there should have been no relationship whatsoever. That's when people started using a different word. Not earthquake. Not seismic event. Pattern. 14 days. Exactly 14 days. January 28th. 4:23 a.m. This time, Pacific Northwest. Bend, Oregon. 400 miles from any major fault line. 700 miles from Bakersfield. Different geology. Different tectonic context. Different everything. Except the time. 4:23 a.m. Thomas Whitmore had been fly fishing guide on the Deschutes River for 32 years. Knew every bend, every rapid, every place where the current spoke, in a language most people never learned to hear. He was setting up for an early charter when the river changed. Not flooded, not receded. Changed. The sound came first, he told the local news station, still wearing his waders, still holding the rod he'd been rigging when it started, like a bass note. So low you feel it more than hear it, coming from downstream, or upstream, or everywhere at once. He stopped talking, looked at the reporter with an expression that would become familiar in the coming days, the look of someone whose reality had been quietly revised. "The river moved," he finally said. "You mean the current changed?" the reporter asked. "No, I mean the river, the whole river, moved." The Deschutes River, at the point where Thomas Whitmore stood that morning, had run its course for approximately 15,000 years, carved by glacial melt, shaped by eons of patient water reshaping stubborn stone. In 4 minutes, precisely 4 minutes, it shifted 23 feet to the east. The entire river. As if the earth beneath had simply decided, here is better than there. 23 feet. The old riverbed sat empty, stones still wet, fish flopping in pools that no longer connected to the current. The new path, 23 feet east, ran smooth and deep as if it had always been there, as if the river itself had never questioned the change. By dawn, Ben's emergency services were receiving the same kinds of calls that had flooded Bakersfield 2 weeks prior. Gardens where driveways had been, driveways where gardens had been. A playground relocated 40 feet north of its original position, wood chips and all, the equipment standing perfectly intact and arranged as if professionally installed in its new location. The Bend First Presbyterian Church, built in 1923, found itself rotated, not collapsed, not damaged, rotated, 17 degrees clockwise. The foundation inspected later that day by structural engineers, whose reports read more like philosophy than science, showed no stress fractures. No evidence of the catastrophic force required to rotate a building that weighed hundreds of tons. It simply faced a different direction than it had the day before. "The door's still open," said Reverend Michael Hastings, standing in front of his church, looking at it the way you might look at a familiar face that has subtly, inexplicably changed. "The windows aren't cracked. The bell tower is still plumb. But we used to face east. We face northeast now." He paused. Behind him, the church white clapboard, tall steeple, the kind of building that appears on postcards about small-town America, stood serene and wrong. "We always faced east," he said quietly. "Tradition. The faithful face east toward the rising sun, toward Jerusalem, toward the return." His voice trailed off. "Now we face 17 degrees further north." The reporter asked if he thought that meant something. Reverend Hastings didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened his Bible he'd been holding it the entire interview, his thumb marking a page, and read, "When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale." He closed the book. "That's Revelation," he said. "Chapter 6, written 2,000 years ago by a man on an island who claimed to see the end of all things." "Do you think this is—" the reporter began. "I think," Reverend Hastings interrupted gently, "that when the earth itself begins to rearrange, we might want to pay attention to what the rearrangement might be pointing toward. 17 degrees. Further north, away from the rising sun. Away from the traditional orientation of hope. Toward what? The question hung in the cold Oregon morning like breath made visible. Within hours, the connection was made. Social media lit up first, as it always does. The amateur investigators, the pattern seekers, the ones who track coincidences with spreadsheets and timestamps and growing conviction. 2 events, 2 locations, 700 miles apart, no geological connection. Same time of day, exactly, 4:23 a.m. Pacific. Same duration, 4 minutes, precisely. Same phenomenon. Not destruction, but displacement. Not chaos, but reorganization. And exactly times 14 days apart. The news networks picked up the story by noon. Split screens showing Bakersfield and Bend. Side-by-side comparisons. Aerial footage of both locations revealing the same impossible truth. The Earth had times edited times itself. The geologists who'd gone silent in California were asked to comment on Oregon. Most declined. The few who agreed to interviews spoke in careful language. Unprecedented events. Ongoing investigation. Too early to determine causation or connection. But one Dr. Sarah Vickers, seismologist with USGS, 23 years of field research, said something in a live interview that her agency would spend the next week trying to walk back. The anchor asked her, "Is there any natural explanation for two identical events in geologically unrelated locations occurring exactly 14 days apart at the exact same time?" Dr. Vickers looked at the camera. Her face carried the weight of someone who'd done the math and didn't like the sum. "No," she said simply. The anchor waited for elaboration. "No, Doctor," Vickers repeated. "There is no natural explanation for precision. Nature doesn't count. Nature doesn't observe 14-day intervals. Nature doesn't reorganize landscapes without breaking them. Nature doesn't—" She stopped, collected herself. "What we're seeing," she continued, voice steadier but somehow more unsettling, "suggests either technology we don't possess or forces we don't understand. And since no technology on Earth can do what we've observed—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The interview ended. Dr. Vickers was placed on administrative leave the following day. Her statement was labeled "premature conclusions based on incomplete data." But the question remained, growing louder in the silence of official explanations. If not natural, if not technological, then what? The religious communities were less hesitant. Churches across the country, especially among congregations that leaned into prophetic interpretation, that read headlines as scripture and scripture as headlines, began holding prayer vigils. Not for the victims. There were no victims, no casualties, no injuries beyond minor cuts and bruises from people startled by the moving earth. They prayed for discernment, for eyes to see what was being shown, for ears to hear what was being spoken. "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof," quoted Pastor James Chen of Dallas First Assembly, speaking to his congregation that Sunday, 5 days after Bend. "The world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers." He let that sit. Founded, established, past tense, finished work. "But what happens?" he asked, voice rising slightly. "When the foundation itself begins to move? When what was established begins to re-establish?" His congregation sat silent. "I don't claim to know what this means," Pastor Chen admitted. "I don't claim special revelation, but I know this. When the ground beneath your feet stops being reliable, you start looking up. You start asking bigger questions. You start wondering if maybe, just maybe, we've been too comfortable, too settled, too convinced that the world as we know it will just continue." He opened his Bible. Joel chapter 2. "The earth quakes before them, the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining." He closed the book. "Before what?" he asked quietly. "Before them. Before times. Who?" The question echoed in sanctuaries across the nation that weekend. Before what? Before who? Before when? Because by then, the pattern watchers had done the math. January 14th, first event. January 28th, second event. 14 days apart. Which meant, if the pattern held, if this was truly a sequence rather than coincidence, the third event would occur on February 11th, 14 days from the second shaking. The predictions spread like wildfire across social platforms. Countdown clocks appeared, websites tracking the theory, forums debating locations. Would it be another western state? Would it jump east? Would it escalate in magnitude? The official response from geological agencies was uniform. There is no scientific basis for predicting seismic events based on temporal patterns. The public is urged to rely on credible sources and avoid speculation. But people weren't speculating about earthquakes. They were watching for something else. Something that followed rules nature didn't recognize. something that kept time. February 11th approached. News crews positioned in major cities across the West. Not officially. No network would admit they were chasing a social media prediction. But camera vans appeared. Correspondents booked hotels. Just in case. Just in case, the Earth decided to speak again. 4:23 a.m. became a time people set alarms for. In California, in Oregon, in Washington, Nevada, Arizona, Utah. Across the western states, people went to bed on February 10th, wondering if they'd wake to stillness or to the deep pulse that had now become sickeningly familiar to thousands. The night passed. 4 a.m. came and went. 4:15, 4:20. People waited, breath held, some praying, some watching, some simply standing in their yards, hands on the ground, waiting to feel what they hoped wouldn't come. 4:23 a.m. Silence. 4:24. Nothing. By 4:30, the collective exhale was almost audible, the forums filled with relief. It's over. Just coincidence after all. We let ourselves get carried away. By sunrise, the news cycle moved on. Predicted earthquake fails to materialize. Experts warn against social media fear-mongering. Life resumed. Normal reasserted itself. For exactly 9 hours. Because at 1:23 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 10:23 a.m. Pacific, a different kind of call came in. Not from the west. From the east. From a place no one had been watching. From a location that would make the pattern impossible to deny. And what happened there, in broad daylight, witnessed by thousands, recorded by hundreds of cameras, streaming live as it occurred. That's when the word coincidence died. That's when the fear truly began. Because the third shaking didn't just match the pattern. It times completed times something. And what came next, what began exactly 4 minutes after the shaking stopped, suggested that these weren't endings at all. They were openings. The question was, openings to what? Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, February 11th, 1:23 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10:23 Pacific. The lunch crowd at the Broad Street Market, oldest continuously operating market in America, founded 1860. Vendors selling fresh bread, local honey, Pennsylvania Dutch specialties. Tourists and locals mingling in the kind of ordinary midday activity that defines a functioning society. Normal. Until it wasn't? Marcus Freeman was filming his daughter, 6 years old, Emma, eating a soft pretzel too big for her hands, mustard on her cheek. He was laughing. The video later provided to investigators, aired on every network, dissected frame by millions, captured the exact moment. 1:23 and 14 seconds. Emma stops chewing. Her face changes, not frightened, confused. "Daddy," she says, looking down. The floor is humming. Marcus laughs. You can hear it on the audio. The floor is humming? What is that? And then he feels it. The camera shakes, not from his hand, from the vibration moving through the ground, through the century-old market foundation, through the table, through the phone itself. That same low-frequency pulse, deeper than sound, felt in bone and tissue before ears process it. The video goes chaotic. People standing, chairs scraping, voices rising. But not panic, not yet. Confusion. The collective uncertainty of a crowd experiencing something their minds can't categorize. Someone shouts, "Earthquake!" But the people from California, and there were several in that market, transplants, tourists, they knew better. "Get outside," one woman yells, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through Bakersfield. "Get outside! Now!" The crowd moves. The camera keeps recording, pointed at the floor now as Marcus scoops up Emma and runs. The image bounces, but the audio captures everything. The deep pulse, steady as a heartbeat. The scraping of hundreds of feet. The sound of the building itself groaning. Not cracking, not breaking. Adjusting. By the time Marcus reaches the street, phone still recording, 2 minutes have passed. The market behind him is rotating, slowly, visibly, the entire structure turning clockwise on its foundation like a massive, lazy Susan, operated by invisible hands. The video shows people stopping in the street, standing frozen, watching a building, a solid, century-old brick and timber building spin, with the deliberate precision of a clock hand. 5 degrees. 10. 15. Emma's voice, small and clear. Why is it dancing, Daddy? Dancing. A 6-year-old's word for an impossibility. At exactly 1:27 p.m., 4 minutes after it began, the movement stopped. The Broad Street market now faced 32 degrees different than it had at lunch. 32 degrees. As if even the angle mattered, as if it was measured. But that was just the beginning. Because unlike Bakersfield and Bend, this happened in daylight. In a city, with thousands of witnesses, hundreds of cameras, live traffic cameras, security footage, smartphones everywhere. The documentation was instant and overwhelming. Within minutes, the videos flooded social media. Within an hour, every news network had gone wall-to-wall coverage. Within 2 hours, the president was being briefed. Because Harrisburg wasn't just Harrisburg. It was the state capital of Pennsylvania. And the displacement wasn't limited to the market. The Pennsylvania State Capitol building completed 1,906, dome modeled after St. Peter's Basilica, one of the most beautiful Capitol buildings in America, had shifted. Not rotated, shifted. 12 feet north. The entire complex. Millions of pounds of stone and steel and history moved 12 feet north of its original foundation. Legislators inside reported feeling the pulse, feeling the movement. Watching through windows as the street grid outside seemed to slide slowly south, or they were sliding north, perspective becoming meaningless when the ground itself becomes relative. No injuries. Not one. But the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A state capital, seat of government, symbol of established order and authority, displaced. The press secretary's statement, released at 3 p.m., was brief and carefully worded. A seismic event of unknown origin has affected downtown Harrisburg. All government personnel are safe. Buildings are being inspected. We ask residents to remain calm and await further information. But calm was already drowning in the flood of realization. 3 events. 3 locations. West Coast, Pacific Northwest, East Coast. All at 23 minutes past the hour. Different hours, same minutes. All lasting precisely 4 minutes. All causing displacement without destruction. Reorganization without chaos. The pattern was undeniable now. And the pattern watchers, the ones who'd been tracking, calculating, mapping, they revealed something that made the already impossible situation exponentially stranger. When you plot the 3 locations on a map, Bakersfield, Bend, Harrisburg, when you draw lines connecting them, you get a triangle. Nearly perfect. The distances aren't quite equal, but the shape is unmistakable. A triangle spanning the continental United States. And the angles, someone with geometry skills and too much time calculated it, the angles of rotation and displacement at each location, when combined, totaled 180 degrees. The exact number required to flip something completely. To invert it. One pastor, Timothy Walsh of Philadelphia, just 90 miles from Harrisburg, stood in his pulpit that very evening for emergency prayer service and said something that would be quoted thousands of times in the coming days. When God wanted to get Egypt's attention, he sent plagues. Specific, targeted, escalating. Each one a sign. Each one a warning. Each one an opportunity to recognize what was happening and respond. We think of them as punishments. But read it again. Read it carefully. They were communications. God speaking in a language that couldn't be ignored. He paused, looking at his congregation. The church was fuller than any Wednesday night in its history. What if these aren't disasters? He asked. What if they're messages? What if the earth itself is being used as a canvas for something we're meant to read? The question hung heavy. Messages require a sender. Messages require content. Messages require recipients able to decode them. The geologists had no framework. Every scientist interviewed repeated variations of the same bewildered conclusion. This defies known physics. This shouldn't happen. This can't happen. Yet, it did. 3 times. The Pentagon convened an emergency meeting, not public knowledge at the time, but leaked later through sources that remained anonymous. The discussion, according to those leaks, centered on one question: is this a weapon? Could another nation have developed technology capable of manipulating Earth itself? Could this be an attack disguised as natural phenomenon? The intelligence agencies ran every analysis: satellite data, seismic records, communications intercepts. Nothing. No energy signatures that matched known weapons, no electromagnetic pulses, no radiation, no technological fingerprint whatsoever. Just Earth moving in ways Earth doesn't move. One analyst reportedly said in that meeting, "If this is a weapon, it's not one built by human hands." The statement was not included in official minutes, but it was never denied. By evening of February 11th, vigils were being held in cities across America. Churches opened their doors, synagogues, mosques, people gathering not in panic, but in that uniquely human response to the inexplicable communal seeking. Seeking answers, seeking comfort, seeking meaning. The cable news networks brought on every expert they could book: geologists, physicists, engineers, all offering theories that sounded increasingly hollow against the weight of observable reality. And then they started bringing on the others: theologians, biblical scholars, eschatology experts, the people who study end times prophecy, with the same rigor scientists study data. Rabbi Joshua Klein, scholar of ancient texts, made an observation during a CNN interview that went viral within hours. In Jewish tradition, in the Talmud, there's a concept called Shevlei Moshiach, the birth pangs of the Messiah. The idea that before the world is redeemed, before the age to come, creation itself goes through contractions. Like a woman in labor, the earth convulses, not to destroy, to birth, to bring forth something new. The anchor asked, "Are you saying you think this is religious in nature?" Rabbi Klein smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm saying that our ancestors had words for things we've forgotten how to recognize. We see seismic events. They saw creation groaning. Same phenomenon, different vocabulary. Maybe their vocabulary was closer to the truth. Creation groaning." Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8. "For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now." Written 2,000 years ago. Describing something that sounded like poetry, until it sounded like a newscast. The night of February 11th, millions of Americans went to bed asking the same questions. Will there be a fourth? Where? When? And the darker question, the one whispered rather than spoken: what is being born? Because if these were birth pangs, if the earth itself was in labor, then something was coming. Something was trying to emerge. The pattern suggested 14-day intervals, which meant February 25th would be the next potential event. 14 days. 2 weeks to wait, to wonder, to watch. The government tried to reassure. FEMA issued preparedness guidelines. The CDC released statements about staying calm. The president addressed the nation, promising resources and investigations and eventual answers. But the footage kept playing. The Broad Street Market rotating like a hand on a clock. The Pennsylvania state capitol displaced from its foundation. Little Emma Freeman asking why the building was dancing. And in the quieter corners of the internet, in forums and chat rooms and comment sections, people were making other connections. 3 events forming a triangle. Triangles are stable shapes, foundational in architecture, in sacred geometry, in symbolism across cultures and faiths. But triangles also point. And when you calculate the center point of the triangle formed by Bakersfield, Bend, and Harrisburg, when you find the geographic middle, you land in a specific location. Middle America, the heartland. Kansas, roughly. Nebraska, the geographic center of the continental United States. Was that significant? Was the pattern pointing to something? Or was the human mind just desperate to find meaning in chaos, seeing design where only chance existed. The debate raged online. Believers versus skeptics. Faith versus science. Pattern versus coincidence. But then someone found the dates. Not just the 14-day intervals. The actual dates themselves. January 14th, January 28th, February 11th. When you write them numerically, 1/14, 1/28, 2/11. Someone with a head for numbers noticed each date's digits sum to specific totals. 1 + 1 + 4 = 6. 1 + 2 + 8 = 11. 2 + 1 + 1 = 4. 6, 11, 4. Random? Probably. But then someone else noticed. In biblical numerology, the study of numbers in Scripture, 6 is the number of man, created on the sixth day, always falling short of 7, the number of completion. 11 is considered the number of disorder, chaos, judgment. 4 is earth, the four corners, the four winds, the material world, man, judgment, earth. 3 words that, strung together, sounded less like coincidence and more like sentence structure. The judgment of man on earth, or earth judging man, or man on earth facing judgment. The interpretation didn't matter as much as the pattern, because patterns suggest intelligence. Patterns suggest intent, and intent suggests, well, it suggests someone is speaking. The question that kept people awake on the night of February 11th, the question that would dominate the coming days, wasn't about geology or technology. It was older, more primal. If the Earth is speaking, who taught it language? And what, exactly, is it trying to say? The answer, or at least the next piece of it, would come not in 14 days as expected, but sooner, much sooner. Because the pattern, it turned out, wasn't finished revealing itself. The 3 shakings were just the first movement. What came next would make them look like whispers, like warnings, like mercy. February 14th, 3 days after Harrisburg, 3 a.m. Central Standard Time. Lebanon, Kansas, population 218, the geographic center of the contiguous United States, marked by a small stone monument on private property that most Americans have never heard of, until now. The Hawkins family owned the land. Generations of wheat farmers. Harold and Ruth, both in their 70s, had lived there for 43 years. Raised 4 children in the white farmhouse that sat a quarter-mile from the center point marker. Ruth woke at 2:47 a.m. Not because of sound, because of light. "I thought the barn was on fire," she told the sheriff later, her hands shaking around a coffee mug she never drank from. "That orange glow, that flickering. You see that in the country? You think fire. You think you're about to lose everything." She woke Harold. They dressed quickly, rushed outside. The barn was fine. The light was coming from the field, from the exact location of the center point marker. Harold grabbed his truck keys. They drove across their own land, headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness toward a glow that grew brighter as they approached. "It looked like sunset," Harold said, his voice flat with the shock of someone still processing. "But coming from the ground, orange and red and gold, pulsing up from the earth like the soil itself was breathing fire." They stopped the truck 50 yards away. The center point monument, a simple stone pyramid, maybe 4 feet tall, weathered by decades of Kansas wind, was untouched. But the ground around it, the ground was moving, not shaking, not heaving, undulating, rising and falling in slow waves, like water, like the surface of an ocean, rendered in soil and stone. Ruth called 911 at 2:53 a.m. "There's something wrong with our field," she said, and the dispatcher would later note how inadequate those words were for what was actually happening. By 3 a.m., the glow was visible from the highway 3 miles away. By 3:15, sheriff's deputies, volunteer firefighters, and half the population of Lebanon stood at the perimeter of the Hawkins property, watching the impossible. By 3:30, news helicopters were en route from Kansas City. By dawn, the world was watching. Again, but this time was different. This wasn't displacement. This wasn't reorganization. This was emergence. The ground at the center point had risen, not explosively, not volcanically, just risen. A dome of earth, perfectly circular, approximately 200 feet in diameter, elevated 12 feet above the surrounding field. 12 feet, the same distance the Harrisburg Capitol had shifted. The dome's surface rippled with that same orange light, pulsing in steady rhythm. One pulse every 4 seconds. 4 seconds. The same duration as the previous events, but inverted. 4 minutes had become 4 seconds. Compressed. Intensified. The geological teams arrived by mid-morning. USGS. University researchers. Federal agencies whose vehicles had no markings, but whose personnel carried themselves with military precision. They established a perimeter, brought equipment, took readings, and found nothing. No heat source for the light, no seismic activity, no radiation, no electromagnetic anomalies. Just light, emanating from soil that shouldn't produce light. Just movement, in earth that shouldn't move like water. Dr. Sarah Vickers, the seismologist who'd been placed on leave after her Bend comments, appeared at the site anyway, drove 16 hours from California. Walked past the perimeter tape at 4 p.m., credentials already revoked, not caring. A deputy tried to stop her. "I need to see it," she said simply. "I need to see it with my own eyes." They let her through. She stood at the edge of the dome for 17 minutes, silent, just watching the light pulse, watching the earth breathe. When she finally spoke, it was to no one in particular, but someone recorded it. The audio spread online within hours. "It's not geological," she said quietly. "It's not technological," which leaves. "Two." She stopped, laughed. A hollow sound. "Which leaves theological. Which leaves categories I wasn't trained for. Which leaves questions my equipment can't measure. Lastelle." She walked back to her car and drove away. Her resignation was submitted electronically that evening, but her words remained. Theological. The religious response was immediate and massive. By February 15th, pilgrims were arriving in Lebanon. Hundreds at first, then thousands. People driving from surrounding states, flying in from across the country, coming to see what the earth was saying at the center of America. The Hawkins family, private people, farming people, suddenly found their property transformed into an accidental shrine. They could have closed it off, could have prosecuted trespassers, could have demanded privacy. Instead, Ruth Hawkins stood at her fence line on the morning of February 16th and made a statement to the gathered crowd and assembled media. "This isn't ours," she said. "This land is ours, legally. But this," she gestured toward the glowing dome, "this belongs to everyone. To God, maybe. To the earth. To whatever is trying to be heard. You want to see it? See it. You want to pray here? Pray. We won't stop you." Harold stood beside her, nodding. "Just respect it," he added. "Respect each other, and respect that something bigger than all of us is happening." The crowd began to organize itself. Prayer circles formed. Hymns were sung. People of different faiths stood side by side, separated by doctrine, but united by awe and uncertainty, and the deep human need to stand in the presence of mystery. A rabbi from St. Louis, a Baptist minister from Oklahoma, a Catholic priest from Denver, a Muslim imam from Kansas City, standing together at the fence line, looking at light coming from earth. Someone asked the priest what he thought it meant. "In Exodus," he said slowly, "God appeared to Moses as fire in a bush. The bush burned, but wasn't consumed. Moses approached because the impossible demanded investigation. God spoke from the fire, not through it, from it." He paused. "I don't know if this is God. I don't presume. But I know this. When the earth itself begins to burn with light it shouldn't contain, maybe we're meant to approach. Maybe we're meant to listen." The imam spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of sacred texts memorized in childhood. "In the Quran, it is written that the earth will declare its news. On the last day, the earth itself will testify, will speak of what happened upon it, what was done. What was ignored? He looked at the dome. I don't claim to know the hour, but when Earth begins to glow with inner light, when it moves like water and breathes like a living thing, perhaps it is preparing to speak. The rabbi added quietly, we are taught that before Messiah comes, before the world is renewed, there will be signs, not in heaven only. On earth, creation itself will announce the coming change. We've been looking up for so long, watching the stars. Maybe we should have been watching the ground. 3 faiths, 3 interpretations, 1 phenomenon. And still the light pulsed. By February 17th, the encampment around the Hawkins farm had grown to nearly 10,000 people. FEMA brought supplies. The National Guard established order. Food trucks appeared. Medical tents, portable facilities. An accidental city, built around a glowing mystery. News coverage was continuous. Every network, every platform. The aerial shots showed the dome at center, ringed by concentric circles of humanity, like a target, like a gathering, like something ancient reenacted with modern tools. Scientists continued their measurements, finding nothing that fit known categories. Theologians debated interpretations on every channel, and the pilgrims kept coming. Among them, survivors of the first 3 events. People from Bakersfield, from Bend, from Harrisburg, making pilgrimages to the center point, driven by something they couldn't articulate. Marcus Freeman brought his daughter Emma, the little girl who'd asked why the building was dancing. A reporter found them in the crowd on February 18th. Why did you come? The reporter asked Marcus. He looked down at Emma, holding his hand, staring at the glowing dome with 6-year-old wonder. Because she asked me to, he said. 3 days ago, out of nowhere, she looks up at me and says, we need to go to the middle, Daddy. That's where the heart is. The reporter blinked. The heart? Emma looked up, her voice clear and certain in the way children's voices can be when they know something adults have forgotten. The earth has a heart. It's waking up. We should be there when it opens its eyes. The interview ended, but the statement spread like wildfire. The earth has a heart. It's waking up. Poetic language from a child, easy to dismiss as imagination, easy to categorize as the innocent misunderstanding of complex events. Except the pulse from the dome was steady, rhythmic, exactly the cadence of a resting heartbeat, 60 beats per minute, the same rate as human cardiac rhythm in calm state. The Earth's heart beating at human speed. Someone measured it on February 19th, posted the findings. The comparison went viral. Earth's pulse, 60 BPM. Human pulse, 60 to 100 BPM. Synchronization, as if the planet and its inhabitants were being tuned to the same frequency, as if whatever was happening wanted resonance, wanted harmony, or was demanding it. The pattern analysts, those who'd predicted the 3rd event, who'd mapped the triangle, who'd calculated the center point, they went deeper. Someone plotted the timeline, the intervals, the progression. 3 events, 14 days apart each. Then the center point activation, 3 days after the 3rd event. 3 and 14. Numbers that appear throughout Scripture, throughout sacred mathematics, throughout human mysticism. 3. The number of divine completeness. Trinity. Past, present, future. Beginning, middle, end. 14. Twice 7. Double completion. In Hebrew numerology, the number that represents David, deliverance, salvation. 3 events of 4 minutes each. 12 minutes total. 12. The number of divine government. 12 tribes. 12 apostles. 12 gates. The numbers stacked. The patterns compounded. Too many to be random. Too precise to be chance. And the dome kept glowing. On February 20th, something new happened. 7:23 a.m. Central Time. The light changed. The orange-gold glow that had pulsed steadily for 7 days began to shift, deepening, darkening toward red on one side, brightening toward white on the other. Like a spectrum, like separation, like division. The crowd noticed immediately. Voices rose, some in alarm, some in awe. The scientific instruments registered the change. Different wavelengths, different intensities. But still no heat, still no radiation, still no explanation. Just light, behaving in ways light doesn't behave in nature. By noon, the dome had clearly divided into two hemispheres. One half glowing deep crimson, one half brilliant white. A perfect division along a north-south axis. The symbolism was unavoidable. Division, separation, the dividing of light from darkness. Let there be light, Genesis opens. The first command, the first separation. And now, at the geographic center of a nation increasingly divided, politically, socially, spiritually, the earth itself was demonstrating division. Red and white, the colors of blood and purity, of warning and surrender, of judgment and mercy. The interpretations multiplied, everyone seeing what their worldview prepared them to see. But beneath the debate, beneath the analysis, a deeper question was forming. If these were signs, if the earth was truly speaking, then what was the message building toward? Three shakings, forming a triangle. One emergence, at the center. Now division, displayed in light. What came next? The answer would not come in 14 days. Not in 3 days. The answer was already beginning. In places no one was watching. At the three original sites, Bakersfield, Bend, Harrisburg, something was stirring. Reports started filtering in on February 21st. Residents near the affected areas describing sounds in the night. Not the deep pulse of the original events. Something else. Something that sounded, according to multiple independent witnesses who had no contact with each other, like singing, like the earth itself had found voice, and was beginning to sing. Not words, not language anyone recognized, just tones, harmonics, resonances that made windows vibrate and hearts race and sleep impossible. The singing started low, barely audible, but it was growing louder, and according to those who heard it, it wasn't random sound. It was a melody, something structured, something intentional, something that sounded impossibly, like it was waiting for a response, like a question being asked, like a call waiting for an answer. And in Lebanon, Kansas, at the glowing, divided dome that marked the center of everything, the light began to pulse faster. No longer 60 beats per minute. Faster, climbing, as if the heart of the earth was no longer resting, as if it was waking fully, as if something was coming that required the whole world to be alert. Ready or not. Bakersfield first. February 22nd, 2:17 a.m. Pacific. The sound woke Sarah Chen from the first real sleep she'd managed since January 14th. The nurse who'd been pulling into her driveway when the first shaking occurred, the one who'd said the earth was waking up. She sat upright in bed, heart hammering. Not from fear, from recognition. The sound was coming through the walls, through the floor, through the very foundation of her home. A low tone, steady and pure, like the lowest note of an organ held indefinitely. No, not one note. Multiple tones, layered, harmonizing. A chord. She walked to her window. Outside, the neighborhood was lighting up house by house. Bedroom lights flickering on. People emerging onto porches and lawns in pajamas and confusion. Everyone hearing it. Everyone feeling it in their chests, in their bones, in that place beneath conscious thought where the body knows things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Sarah grabbed her phone. The neighborhood message board was already exploding with posts. Anyone else hearing this? What is that sound? It's beautiful. Why is it beautiful? Should I be scared? Coming from the ground. Definitely coming from underground. She opened her door, stepped barefoot onto her lawn. The grass was vibrating, gentle, rhythmic. Her neighbor, Mr. Patterson, 73 years old, retired music teacher, stood in his yard with tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Patterson," Sarah called softly. He didn't look at her, just stared at the ground beneath his feet. "E-flat major," he said, voice breaking. "That's E-flat major. 3 tones. Perfect harmony. The key of..." He stopped, shook his head. "The key of the sublime. Beethoven's Eroica. Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra. The key composers chose when they wanted to convey the heroic, the transcendent, He couldn't finish. Sarah walked closer. How is the earth singing a chord? Mr. Patterson finally looked at her. His face carried something beyond wonder, something approaching reverence. It's not just singing a chord, he whispered. It's holding it. Perfect pitch, perfect resonance. No wavering, no decay. Just sustained beauty coming from dirt and rock. The sound continued through the night. By dawn, acoustics experts from USC and Stanford had descended on Bakersfield with equipment designed to measure, analyze, map sound. By noon, they'd confirmed what Mr. Patterson's trained ear had already known. 3 distinct tones: E-flat, G, B-flat. The notes of an E-flat major triad, emanating from the exact locations that had experienced displacement on January 14th. Multiple epicenters, all producing the same chord, all in perfect synchronization. The lead researcher, Dr. Amelia Cross, gave a brief statement to press at 2 p.m., her professional composure barely masking her bewilderment. We can identify the frequencies. We can measure the amplitude. We can map the source locations. What we cannot explain is the mechanism. Sound requires vibration. Vibration requires energy input. We can find no energy source, no mechanical process, nothing that should produce sustained tones of this clarity and stability. A reporter asked, "So where is it coming from?" Dr. Cross looked directly at the camera. "If I told you what our instruments suggest, you'd think I'd lost my mind. So I'll just say this. The sound is real. The source is impossible. And it's getting louder." 300 miles north, Bend was hearing different notes. February 22nd, 2:17 a.m. Pacific. The exact same moment Bakersfield's chord began. Thomas Whitmore, the fishing guide who'd watched the Deschutes River move, was already awake. He'd barely slept since January 28th, spent his nights walking the riverbank, trying to understand what he'd witnessed. The sound reached him as he stood by the water. Higher tones than Bakersfield. Lighter. Almost crystalline. The river responded. The current began to shimmer with patterns that shouldn't exist in moving water. Geometric ripples. Perfect circles expanding from no visible source. Spirals forming and dissolving in rhythms that matched the sound. Thomas pulled out his phone, started recording. The footage shows the river by moonlight, the surface dancing with light and pattern. The audio captures the tones pure, ethereal, unmistakably musical. "It's singing back," Thomas says on the video, his voice filled with quiet amazement. "The earth sings, and the river is answering." By morning, hundreds had gathered along the Deschutes, watching the water move in ways water shouldn't move, listening to sounds that emerged from stone and soil. The acoustics team from Portland arrived by 10 a.m. Their analysis confirmed 3 tones, different from Bakersfield. A, C sharp, E, and A major triad. The key of hope, according to musicians who commented online. The key of sunrise, of new beginnings. The key Mozart used for his most joyful works. Different notes than California, but the same structure. 3 tones. Perfect harmony, impossible source. The pattern held. 2,000 miles east, Harrisburg heard the third voice. February 22nd, 5:17 a.m. Eastern. The same moment, adjusted for time zones. The sound woke Marcus Freeman and his daughter Emma. They'd returned from Lebanon 3 days prior, Emma insisting she needed to be home, that she needed to be ready. "Ready for what?" Marcus had asked. "For when it sings," Emma had said simply. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness, it was singing. Marcus went to Emma's room, found her sitting up in bed, completely calm, listening. "That's the third voice, Daddy," she said. Now all 3 are awake. "What do you mean, 3 voices?" "The West sings deep. The Middle West sings high. The East sings." She paused, tilting her head. "The East sings sad." Marcus listened. She was right. The tones coming through the walls of their Harrisburg home were lower than what was being heard in Bend, but higher than Bakersfield. And there was something in the quality, some minor interval, some harmonic relationship that carried weight, gravity, a kind of beautiful sorrow. By noon, the analysis came through. F, A flat, C, an F minor triad. The key of lamentation, according to musical tradition. The key of depth and darkness. The key Beethoven used for his most tragic movements. 3 locations. 3 chords. 3 different emotional qualities rendered in pure tone. Joy in the west, hope in the northwest, sorrow in the east, and all of them sustained, continuous, growing louder by the hour. The pattern hunters went to work immediately, plotting the musical structure across the geographic triangle. E flat major, A major, F minor. Not random keys, not arbitrary selections. The 3 chords, when analyzed together, formed a harmonic progression, a musical relationship that composers had used for centuries to create tension and release, to build toward resolution. One music theorist from Juilliard, Dr. Terence Kim, posted a video analysis that went viral within hours. What we're hearing, across 3 locations, is the beginning of a cadence, a musical phrase that wants, needs to resolve. These 3 chords, in this sequence, create anticipation. They build tension. They demand a 4th chord, a resolution. In musical terms, they're asking a question that requires an answer. He played the 3 chords in sequence on his piano. The sound was beautiful and unsettling, leaving listeners waiting for something more, something that would complete the phrase. In every musical tradition, Dr. Kim continued, in every culture that's developed harmonic structure, this pattern means the same thing. Something is coming. Something is next. This is not an ending. This is a beginning that demands completion. He paused, hands still on the keys. If the earth is composing music, it's composing a question. And questions. He played the 3 chords again, letting them hang unresolved. Questions demand answers. The video ended. The chords continued. By February 23rd, the sound was audible miles from the original displacement sites, spreading, resonating through the ground like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. People drove toward the sound, drew closer, sat in fields and parking lots and parks, listening to earth sing. Prayer gatherings formed at all 3 locations, mirroring the pilgrimage to Lebanon. Thousands in Bakersfield, thousands in Bend, thousands in Harrisburg, all listening to different notes of the same impossible song. Testimonies emerged, witnesses describing how the sound affected them. A woman in Bakersfield, I haven't felt peace like this since my husband died. It's like being held. Like the earth itself is saying, everything will be okay. A man in Bend, it makes me want to cry, but not from sadness, from hope, like something beautiful is about to happen and I get to be here to see it. A teenager in Harrisburg, it sounds like goodbye, like the world mourning something, like it knows something we don't, and it's sad for us. Different experiences, different interpretations, but all of them profound, all of them transformative. The singing was doing something to people, changing something. Sleep patterns altered. People reported dreams unlike any they'd experienced before. Vivid, symbolic. Dreams of light and water and earth reshaping itself. Dreams of voices speaking in languages no one knew but somehow understood. A pastor in Bakersfield collected dream testimonies from his congregation. 47 people, 47 different dreams, with the same core imagery. A door in the earth, closed, sealed, ancient, and something on the other side, pressing, waiting, ready to emerge. What stands out, the pastor said in a sermon on February 24th, is that in every dream, the door is about to open. Not threatening, not destructive, just opening. Like something has been waiting a very long time, and its time has come. He referenced Scripture, Revelation 3. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. We always read that as God knocking on the human heart, the pastor said quietly. But what if it works both ways? What if humanity has been knocking for so long, crying out, questioning, begging for answers, that finally the door is opening? What if God is responding with the only language that transcends all barriers? Music, pure, universal, undeniable. The congregation sat in silence. Outside, the earth hummed its three-note chord. At Lebanon, Kansas, the divided dome responded to the three voices. On February 24th, 9 a.m. Central, the light began to pulse in rhythm with the distant chords. Red hemisphere pulsing to one rhythm, white hemisphere to another. Two beats, two patterns, not in conflict, but in conversation. Like a heartbeat that had become syncopated. Like the Earth's heart, learning to beat in stereo. The pilgrims at the center point noticed immediately. The scientific instruments confirmed it. The light pulses at Lebanon were synchronized with the acoustic frequencies from the three sites. Bakersfield's E-flat major, the red hemisphere pulsed. Ben's A major, the white hemisphere pulsed. Harrisburg's F minor, both hemispheres pulsed together. Sound and light, separated by thousands of miles, moving in perfect coordination. Communication. That was the word that started appearing in every analysis, every article, every breathless social media post. The Earth wasn't just moving, wasn't just glowing, wasn't just singing. It was communicating, across vast distances, through multiple mediums, in a language that transcended words but carried unmistakable meaning. The question was, communicating to whom? To humanity? To itself? To something else? And what was it saying? Dr. Kim, the Juilliard theorist, posted a follow-up video on February 25th. I've been analyzing the harmonic relationship between the three chords, he said, looking exhausted but energized. The mathematical ratios, the frequency relationships, and I found something. He pulled up a chart showing waveforms and numerical data. The intervals between these notes, the precise distances in frequency match ratios found in nature, in sacred geometry, in the orbital mechanics of celestial bodies. These aren't just any three chords, they're the three chords. The harmonic series that underlies physical reality itself. He looked at the camera. Whoever or whatever is producing this sound knows music at a level beyond human composition. This is the music of spheres, the harmony of creation. The sound that, according to ancient philosophers, holds the universe together. He paused. And it's building towards something. Because this harmonic sequence, if it follows natural law, if it follows musical truth, requires a resolution, a fourth element, a final chord that brings everything into alignment. When? Someone off-camera asked. Dr. Kim checked his notes. Based on the pattern of escalation, based on how the sound is growing in amplitude, based on how the light at Lebanon is accelerating, he calculated, I'd say we have less than 72 hours before something happens. Something that completes this sequence. What happens when it completes? Dr. Kim looked uncomfortable. In music, when a phrase resolves, you get release. Tension dissolves into peace. Discord becomes harmony. Questions find answers. And in reality? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know what a planetary scale harmonic resolution looks like. But based on everything we've seen, the precision, the intentionality, the sheer scope, it's going to be undeniable. Whatever is coming, no one will be able to ignore it. The video ended. Views climbed into the millions within hours. And across America, people started counting down. 72 hours? 3 days. The biblical number again. The prophetic interval. Death and resurrection. Jonah in the fish. Jesus in the tomb. The space between ending and beginning. 3 days until the Earth's question found its answer. 3 days until the music resolved. 3 days until whatever was pressing against the door finally pushed through. The government issued statements urging calm. FEMA prepared emergency protocols. The National Guard mobilized in multiple states. Not for invasion. Not for disaster. For something no one had words for. For contact. For emergence. For revelation. For the moment when the ground beneath humanity's feet stopped being passive foundation and became active participant, when Earth stopped being setting and became character, when the oldest voice in creation finally spoke loud enough that even the deafest ears would have to listen, the countdown began. February 28th loomed, and in Bakersfield, in Bend, in Harrisburg, in Lebanon, the earth sang louder, harmonies building, light intensifying, pulses accelerating, like a symphony approaching its climax, like a birth approaching its final contraction, like a door about to open. And, on the other side? Well, that's what the next 72 hours would reveal. February 26th, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 48 hours until the projected resolution. The President addressed the nation from the Oval Office, a rare primetime emergency broadcast carried on every network, streamed on every platform, translated into dozens of languages. "My fellow Americans," she began, and her voice carried the weight of someone choosing words with excruciating care. Over the past 6 weeks, our nation, our world, has witnessed events that challenge our understanding of the natural order. I want to assure you that every scientific resource, every analytical capability, every expert in relevant fields has been deployed to understand what is happening. She paused, the cameras held steady on her face. I also want to be honest with you. We don't have complete answers. What we do have is data, patterns, and a timeline that suggests something significant may occur in the coming days. She outlined the facts, the 4 events, the triangle formation, the center point, emergence, the harmonic, phenomena. No speculation, no interpretation, just observable reality presented in careful language. Then she said something that would be quoted and analyzed for years. Throughout human history, there have been moments when the unexplained becomes undeniable, when what we thought we knew proves insufficient. When we are collectively called to witness something that expands our understanding of what is possible, I believe we are in such a moment now. She looked directly at the camera. I'm asking all Americans to remain calm, to support your neighbors, to listen to local authorities. But I'm also asking something else. I'm asking you to pay attention, to watch, to be present for what may be the most significant event in human history. The address ended. No reassurances that everything would be fine, no promises of safety, no diminishing of what was happening. Just an acknowledgement. Something is coming. Be ready. The global response was immediate. Other nations issued similar statements, leaders across continents addressing their populations with the same careful honesty. This wasn't just an American phenomenon anymore, because by February 26th, other locations were reporting sounds. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. In Australia, low-frequency tones emerging from the outback. In Brazil, harmonics rising from the Amazon basin. In Mongolia, music from the steppes. In Iceland, resonance from volcanic fields. The earth wasn't singing in 3 voices. It was singing everywhere. A global chorus. Different notes, different tones, but all of it building toward the same moment of convergence. The same resolution. February 27th, 3 p.m. Central Time. 24 hours until the projected completion. At Lebanon, Kansas, the crowd had swelled to nearly 50,000 people. The small farming community transformed into a city of pilgrims. Tents covered the landscape. Makeshift infrastructure everywhere. Portable generators, food distribution centers, medical stations. And at the center, the dome. The light had become almost blinding. Red and white hemispheres now pulsing so rapidly they appeared to flicker. The boundary between them, sharp as a blade's edge. The division intensifying. Harold and Ruth Hawkins stood at their farmhouse window, looking out at what their quiet land had become. You think we did the right thing? Harold asked. Letting everyone come? Ruth took his hand. I think if the earth itself is speaking, we don't get to control who listens. Outside, the crowd was organizing itself in ways that emerged naturally, without official coordination. Concentric circles around the dome, people arranging themselves by instinct or inspiration, into a pattern that, from aerial footage, looked like ripples on water, or like a target, waiting for impact. Prayer continued, constant, overlapping languages and traditions and expressions of faith, creating their own kind of music beneath the earth's deeper song. A Methodist minister from Tennessee found himself standing next to a Buddhist monk from California. Neither spoke. Both stood with hands open, palms down, as if trying to feel what was rising from below. After an hour, the monk spoke quietly. In the sutras, it teaches that the earth is not separate from us, not other. We emerge from it, return to it, are made of it. When earth suffers, we suffer. When earth awakens, he paused. When earth awakens, perhaps we awaken too. The minister nodded slowly. Paul wrote that creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, that the whole creation has been groaning. We always read that as metaphor, as poetry. He looked at the glowing dome. What if it was journalism? What if he was reporting what he actually heard? Creation groaning, waiting, expecting something. Look, 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 look. The monk smiled slightly. Different words, same truth. The earth is alive, has always been alive. We just forgot how to hear it. Lass. Across the country, at the 3 original sites, the singing reached new intensity. Bakersfield's chord, once barely audible beyond the immediate displacement zone, could now be heard clearly for 15 miles in every direction. People reported physical effects, sensations of vibration in their chest cavities, heart rhythms syncing to the frequency. Some described euphoria, others overwhelming emotion. A few reported visions, brief flashes of light, of patterns, of geometric shapes that dissolved when directly observed. The local hospital reported a surge of admissions, not from injury, from transcendence. People overcome, fainting, weeping, laughing, unable to process the intensity of whatever the sound was triggering in their nervous systems. Dr. Amelia Cross, the acoustics researcher, gave an update at 4 p.m. Pacific. The amplitude has increased by 40% in the last 12 hours. At this rate of escalation, by tomorrow at this time, the sound will be physically dangerous to anyone within a mile of the source. We're recommending evacuation of the immediate zones. A reporter asked, "What happens if people don't evacuate?" Dr. Cross hesitated. Sound at sufficient volume doesn't just damage hearing, it affects cellular structure, disrupts biological processes. At the levels we're projecting for tomorrow. She stopped, choosing words carefully. The human body wasn't designed to withstand sustained frequencies at that intensity. So it could kill people? It could transform them, she said, then looked startled by her own word choice. I mean, it could cause serious harm. Please, evacuate. But people weren't evacuating. They were coming closer. In Bend, along the Deschutes River, thousands gathered despite official warnings, watching the water dance, listening to the crystalline tones that seemed to promise something just beyond comprehension. Thomas Whitmore, the fishing guide, stood at the riverbank giving impromptu tours to pilgrims who asked him to explain what happened. "I can tell you what I saw," he'd say. "I can tell you the river moved, but I can't tell you why. I can't tell you what it means. All I know is that water which just flows, which just follows gravity and landscape, that water has been moving in patterns for 6 days now, patterns that look like language, like script written in current and ripple." He'd pause, looking at the river. "I've spent my whole life reading water, reading where fish hide, where current runs deep or shallow. I thought I knew this river, but now," he'd shake his head, "now I think the river was reading me the whole time, learning me, and now it's decided to write something of its own." In Harrisburg, the mood was different. The minor key chord carried its weight differently. Less euphoria, more solemnity. People gathering at the displaced Capitol building, sitting in silence, listening to the earth's lament. Marcus Freeman brought Emma every day. She'd sit on the Capitol steps, drawing in a notebook her father bought her. Page after page of images that shouldn't come from a 6-year-old mind. Geometric patterns, spirals, mandalas, complex symmetries. "Where do you see these, baby?" Marcus asked, looking at a drawing that resembled sacred geometry from ancient traditions she'd never studied. "The ground shows me," Emma said simply, not looking up from her crayons. "When I listen, I see. The singing makes pictures." Another child nearby, an 8-year-old boy named David, was doing the same thing. Different drawings, same complexity, his mother noticed, showed Marcus. "He's never drawn anything like this before," she whispered. "He's never been artistic, but since the singing started." A dozen children in the area, all drawing, all producing imagery beyond their years or training, all translating sound into symbol. Like their developing minds could process frequencies adult consciousness couldn't integrate. Like they were receiving the message clearly. February 28th, 12 a.m. Central Time, the day of projected resolution. Midnight vigils began at all 4 sites simultaneously. At Lebanon, 50,000 voices lifted in prayer and song, hymns and chants and wordless harmonies, humanity singing back to the earth that sang to them. The sound was captured on dozens of live streams. The image of that glowing dome, surrounded by concentric rings of gathered humans, their faces lit by phones and candles and the radiance from the ground itself, became the defining image of the entire phenomenon. One aerial shot, taken by a news helicopter at 12:17 a.m., went viral instantly. The dome at center, the crowd radiating outward, and in the sky above, the stars. Someone with astronomical software plotted the star positions visible at that exact moment from that exact location. The constellation directly overhead, Draco, the dragon, the serpent. In biblical cosmology, the ancient enemy, the deceiver, the force of chaos, directly overhead at the moment of global convergence. Coincidence? At this point, the word had lost all meaning. By 6 a.m., evacuations were mandatory within 1 mile of all 3 singing sites. Most people ignored the orders. "If the earth is speaking," one woman told a police officer trying to move her from the Bakersfield zone, "then I want to hear what it says, even if it costs me." The officer didn't push, just nodded, moved on. What were they supposed to do? Arrest 50,000 people for listening to the ground? By noon, the sound had become visible. Not metaphorically, literally visible. The air above the 3 sites was shimmering, rippling, like heat distortion, but the temperatures were mild, not heat causing the effect. Sound, pure sound, at frequencies so intense they were warping light itself. Physicists scrambled to explain it. Quantum mechanics, wave-particle duality, the boundary between energy and matter becoming permeable. But the explanations sounded hollow against the sheer presence of what was happening. Theory couldn't contain this. Math couldn't predict it. This was something else. 3 p.m. Central Time, 28 minutes, until 3:23 p.m. The time adjusted for Central Zone that corresponded to 4:23 a.m. Pacific, the recurring moment of all previous events. If the pattern held, if the projection was accurate, this was it. The resolution moment. The final chord. The answer to the question the Earth had been asking. Every camera in the world seemed to be pointed at one of the 4 locations. Live streams from Lebanon, from Bakersfield, from Bend, from Harrisburg. Split screens showing all 4 simultaneously. Hundreds of millions watching, perhaps billions. Humanity pausing, collectively holding breath, waiting. The singing intensified. The light blazed. The ground itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. 3:20 p.m. 3 minutes. The children at all 4 sites stopped drawing simultaneously, looked up, eyes wide. Emma Freeman grabbed her father's hand. "It's opening, Daddy. The door is opening." "What door, baby? What door, baby?" She pointed at the ground beneath their feet, the one we've been standing on the whole time. 3:22 p.m. 1 minute. The singing hit a crescendo, the 3 chords from the 3 sites audible now across hundreds of miles, blending, merging, creating overtones and harmonics that filled the air with sound so dense it felt solid. The dome at Lebanon pulsed so fast The red and white began to blur together, mixing, combining, creating pink, then rose, then something that wasn't red or white, but both, and neither. 3:23 p.m. Silence. Absolute, immediate, total. The singing stopped. The light froze. The earth held perfectly, impossibly still. For 7 seconds, the world waited. 7 seconds of silence so profound that people would later describe it as the loudest thing they'd ever heard. 7 seconds of absolute pause between question and answer, between old world and new. Then, the light at Lebanon changed. Not brighter, not dimmer. It changed color. Gold, pure gold, like molten sun, like liquid dawn, rising from the dome. Not as light anymore, but as something more substantial, something between light and matter, between energy and form, rising like a column, like a pillar, like what Moses followed through the wilderness, like what appeared at Pentecost, like every description in every sacred text of how the divine appears when it touches the physical, a pillar of golden light, extending from the dome upward into the sky, higher, higher, piercing cloud cover, visible for hundreds of miles. And at the same moment, at the 3 singing sites, the sound returned. But not the 3 separate chords. One chord, perfect, unified, all 12 tones of the chromatic scale, vibrating in absolute harmony. The resolution. Every note singing together, every frequency aligned. Discord transformed into unity. Question answered with fullness. The sound lasted 4 minutes. The light held for the same duration. And in those 4 minutes, across the globe, people reported the same experience. Peace. Not emotional peace. Something deeper. Cellular peace. Atomic peace. The peace that comes when everything, body, mind, spirit, earth, sky, aligns perfectly for one eternal moment. Some fell to their knees. Some raised their hands. Some wept. Some laughed. All of them changed. Because you don't stand in the presence of the earth itself singing unity and remain who you were before. You don't witness matter and light and sound merge into something beyond category and return unchanged. You don't hear the voice of creation and forget what language sounds like when everything speaks at once. At 3:27 p.m. Central Time, the light descended back into the dome. The sound faded to silence. The earth settled. And 50,000 people in Lebanon, Kansas, thousands more at the 3 sites, billions watching on screens across the planet, all asked the same question. What now? What happens after the earth speaks? What happens after the door opens? What happens when heaven touches dirt and leaves fingerprints? The answer came 3 hours later. Not from the sites, not from the scientists, not from the theologians or the governments or the experts. The answer came from the children. Emma Freeman, David Chen, dozens of others across all 4 locations. They spoke in unison, different voices, same words, like they were reading from a script written in the light itself, like they'd been chosen as translators, like they were delivering a message humanity had been waiting for since the first human looked at the sky and asked, "Is anyone there?" What they said would change everything. What they said would confirm every hope and every fear. What they said would prove that the shaking, the singing, the light, the patterns, all of it had been prelude. All of it had been announcement. All of it had been the earth preparing humanity to hear one simple statement. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And what comes next? The children spoke as one. Their voices carried across every live feed, every broadcast, every phone held in trembling hands. Emma Freeman in Harrisburg. The boy named David in Lebanon. Dozens more at the other sites. Different ages, different places, same words. We are not alone. We have never been alone. The message landed like a stone in still water. Ripples moved outward fast. In living rooms across America, people sat forward. In churches, heads bowed lower. In streets, strangers looked at each other without speaking. The world watched and prayed because something ancient and new had just touched the ground we walk on every day. For 3 hours after the light faded and the sound stopped, a strange calm settled. The earth grew quiet. The air felt lighter. Reports came in from every state. People described the same feeling. A weight lifted, a question answered. The kind of peace that makes you believe the worst is behind us. Scientists confirmed it first. The frequencies dropped to nothing. The dome in Kansas returned to ordinary soil. The rivers flowed straight again. The buildings stayed where they had settled. It was over, or so it seemed. Because at 6:23 p.m. Central Time, 3 hours after the final chord, a new transmission began. Not from the sites, not from the children, not from any voice we recognized. It came through every device at once. Phones, radios, television sets, even speakers that had been turned off. A single tone, clear, steady. The same unified chord from earlier, but now carrying words woven inside it. Words that formed in the mind before the ears could catch them. The message was short. You heard the question. You saw the answer. But this was only the beginning. The door is open. What steps through next will arrive where the pattern first pointed. The center holds. Watch the heartland. 14 days. Then silence again. 14 days. The same number that started everything. The same interval between each shaking. The same count that brought the singing and the light and the children speaking as one. The government called it an unknown signal. Experts called it mass hallucination. But millions of recordings prove otherwise. The message played on every screen. The same words. The same warning. And in Lebanon, Kansas, at the exact spot where the dome had risen, something new appeared in the soil. A mark, burned into the earth without heat. A perfect circle, with 3 lines extending outward. One toward California, one toward Oregon, one toward Pennsylvania. A map, drawn by the ground itself, pointing back to the beginning. The world is still praying, not out of fear this time, out of readiness. Because if the earth spoke once in music and light, it can speak again in ways we have no name for yet. And according to the pattern that has not failed once, the next voice arrives in exactly 14 days, in the place where the triangle began, where the first call came at 4:23 a.m. What steps through the open door will not come quietly. It will come to the very spot where the transmission ends there.